Now, as you've probably already heard, it seems to be pretty much official that Billy D. Williams will be reprising his role as Lando Calrissian in Episode 9. And the reason why I say it seems to be is because even though multiple sources are reporting this, we've yet to hear anything from either Lucasfilm or Billy D. himself confirming it. So there's always the chance that this is just a rumor being reported as fact and won't end up coming to pass. Nevertheless, I'd have to imagine this is true considering Billy D himself has said he'd like to be in the sequel trilogy and that he's essentially waiting for their phone call. And when you consider Disney and Lucasfilm could use some good press right now, and something that'll get those fans who might currently be less than excited about Episode 9, something to talk about and be excited about, bringing Billy D back only makes sense, and leaves me left to only ask what took so long, because not only is Lando a fan favorite, but his absence thus far has been glaring. And maybe somehow this really has been all about timing, that they wanted to wait until after the solo anthology movie, after we got young Lando, to show us old Lando, though I don't know why or how that would make any sense. Still, it would be great to see Lando pilot the Falcon one last time, and even tell Rey about how he used to keep it meticulously clean until he lost it to Han, or make a comment about how the ship's computer is so fussy because of the programming of a droid he once had to upload into it. Whatever part Lando plays in Episode 9, though, I wouldn't expect it to be a big part considering Billy D is hardly a young man anymore. It's also a shame that the only reunion on screen that we'll get is between him and Chewie, that we won't see Lando and Han on screen together one last time unless it's somehow in a flashback, which of course would require Harrison Ford to come back, and I really don't see that happening. Anyway, this all leads us to my discussion starter question of the week, and that is, did Disney and Lucasfilm approach this trilogy the wrong way? Has their handling of the legacy characters, or the main characters from the original trilogy, been their biggest mistake thus far? Should they have tried harder to honor these characters, and make at least the first movie in the trilogy more about them? And was it really necessary to show how they'd all basically failed since we last saw them? And not only did they fail, but in the case of Han and Luke, both felt responsible for the fall of Ben Solo to the dark side, and then both essentially ran away and hid instead of trying to do anything about this monster they'd helped create, who also happened to still be very much family. And the problem with this, especially when you factor in Snoke had manipulated Ben his whole life, is that it seems to take all the responsibility away from our main villain. In other words, Kylo Ren is completely a victim of circumstance. Even his final fall to the dark side was not so much a choice he made, like how Anakin made a choice, but that he was a victim of a poor decision on his uncle's part and, from his misguided point of view, acted justly when he defended himself and lashed out against Luke's other students who, for all he knew, would seek to kill him as well. And this in itself is not a problem, really. It makes for a sympathetic villain that we can hope to see redeemed on some level. The problem, for me at least, is that the hero who will likely see to this redemption, that being Rey, apparently had nothing to learn from those who were responsible for Ben's fall in the first place. In other words, Rey does not seek to redeem Ben because of Luke and or Han, those who failed him initially, of course, but for her own reasons that she's just come to somehow because she force-Skyped with him a couple times and now understands him, and completely forgives and forgets that a few days prior, he tortured her and murdered his own father. In fact, Rey seems hell-bent on redeeming Kylo in spite of what the heroes who failed him have to say about him, especially Luke, who all but tells Rey that Ben Solo is gone and just let it be already. And this is why, whether people realize it or not, so many have an issue with Rey. She not only had nothing to learn from her heroes of old, but was basically the spark that brought them out of their funk, if you will. And that in itself isn't bad. I'm fine that she reinvigorated their faith, especially in the case of Luke, though, to be clear, I do take issue with him so horribly losing his way and faith in the first place. Anyway, Rey saving Luke is not where I have a problem. It's Rey saving Luke and then having nothing to learn from him. Instead, everything she does is in spite of him. Everything she learns while on Ahch-To is in spite of him. And that is a horrible way to endear a new hero to the fans of the old one. Instead, it makes them resentful of her and robs Luke of the chance to get his own redemption, much like how Obi-Wan and Yoda, who had failed Anakin in their own ways, got their own redemption through Luke because they had trained him. And yes, you can certainly say Luke had his final moment or victory over Kylo when he helped what was left of the Resistance escape the clutches of the First Order. But if anything, this action only pushed Kylo further down the dark path by making him even more hateful towards Luke. And I'm not saying Luke was in the wrong by doing what he did for saving the Resistance, but at the same time, he's all but solidified Kylo's hate for him. And unless he shows up as a Force ghost in Episode 9 to speak with Rey, he will play almost no part in saving his nephew. All of this then leads us back to the question, should the approach with the sequel trilogy have been totally different? Is the mishandling of the heroes of old at the center of why so many people dislike the new trilogy, and The Last Jedi in particular? Did Leia and Han really need to be separated? Or couldn't we just have had Leia send Han to find Poe after he didn't report back? And that's when Han runs into Rey, Finn, BB-8, and while on their way back to the Resistance, they get attacked by some old adversary of Han, and are forced to stop at Takodana to make some quick repairs to the Falcon. Then there's Luke on the island. Now, Rian Johnson says the hardest thing he had to do was to find a reason why Luke was there, why he'd exiled himself, which, yes, is kind of proof that there was no grand plan for this trilogy, but that's besides the point. Anyway, the best he could come up with was that Luke had given up on the Jedi, his family, and his friends, and pretty much everything else, when he could have made it where those were the very reasons why he was on that island. That as a Jedi, he had followed the will of the Force and gone to the island to wait for the one who could save the future of the Jedi, and his family and friends, and redeem Ben because he was the one who had initially failed him. Because he knew it couldn't be him, just like Obi-Wan and Yoda knew they couldn't be the ones to save Anakin. He then goes on to train Rey, and I guarantee you if Luke had trained Rey in Episode 8, a lot of people would feel very differently about her character right now. And look, I know many of you are going to want to make the argument that this new trilogy isn't about the old characters, that this was supposed to be a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. But the problem is, it doesn't feel like a torch is being passed. It feels like Rey's taking that torch and just running off with it. Fans didn't wait 30 plus years for a trilogy that tells them that their heroes had failed and now had nothing to offer the next generation, that Rey would have to clean up a mess they'd made without any help from them. And that's actually kinda insulting considering this franchise became what it did because of those fans who fell in love with it and those characters 40 plus years ago, not to mention all of those who found it over the years and developed an equally deep passion and respect for the franchise. And I'm not trying to sound like a bitter fanboy here, but I'm actually stunned Rian Johnson was allowed to do what he did to Luke Skywalker, that no one at Lucasfilm stood up and said that this is a bad idea, and a lot of fans are going to react very negatively to it. Sure, it's a bold story to tell, and maybe tries to teach us something about ourselves, our world, and the hero worship that runs rampant in it. But every time I seem to watch the news these days, I hear another story about a celebrity accused of doing this or that. Every day in the real world we watch another hero fall. So I'm not sure Star Wars needed to teach us that we're all fallible when, quite clearly, that's a message we get all too often in the real world. Maybe instead it should have tried to teach us that those who always stick to their morals and beliefs can rise above. And though I'm ecstatic that it looks like Lando will be in Episode 9, I can't help but wonder, first, what took so long, and second, is this too little too late? Has the damage already been done and some fans won't come back no matter what? And I'm not saying I believe Star Wars is dying, but I am saying it's lost a lot of fans, and I'm not sure what, if anything, can be done about it. So my question to all of you, to go along with all the other ones I've asked in this video, is what do you think the main culprit is behind this fractured fan base? Was it a domino effect that started with the mishandling of the legacy characters, or is it something else entirely, and if so, what? And I know some of you will say it all relates back to the agendas of those who control Lucasfilm, mainly Kathleen Kennedy. But if that's your belief, and it's fine if it is, I have to ask you, where do you think it comes from? Do you think Disney purchased Lucasfilm with the intent on using it as a platform? Or did they purchase it purely with the intent to profit financially from the biggest film franchise in history? And it's been those running the show at Lucasfilm who have been the ones trying to push an agenda. Now I know oftentimes Disney gets blamed for the problems with Star Wars, but when you keep in mind Disney also owns Marvel, and I pretty much never hear people complaining about an agenda beyond just making good movies, I wonder if Disney has indeed taken a very hands-off approach with Lucasfilm, like they seem to have with Marvel, and that's actually where the problem is. And before I end this video and let you all have your say in the comments below, let me just say I don't make these videos to anger fans of The Last Jedi and rally people against it. If you love that movie, that's fine, it really is. But I implore those people not to just ignore the problems of the fan base because you're happy with everything. The same way I implore the people who hated The Last Jedi to not completely dismiss those who enjoyed that movie. At the end of the day, as fans, we all want what's best for Star Wars. And just because we can't always agree on exactly what that is, doesn't mean we have to treat each other horribly. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments and tell me what you think about any of the points I've tried to make in this video, or to answer any of the questions I've laid out. And this weekend, I'll be making a follow-up video that delves into what you all had to say. So again, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.